Welcome to the World Builders Anvil, episode 234. Today we interrupt your regularly scheduled episode to bring you part 2 of the interview with Matthew and Tim Bannock. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world?
Do you need more? Does it make sense?
Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination.
This is the place where we will prime your mind.
Now it's time to heat up the forge,
break out the mithril ingots and hammer.
Welcome to the World Builders Anvil. I'm Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And I'm Michael Miller.
Let's sup from the muck of Java and build. What was that moment where you said, I'm good enough to share this stuff. I can do this. What was that moment for you? Okay, Matthew, what was the moment for you?
I would say probably in college. I met another guy who was really interested in tabletop gaming. He had just gotten out of the military. And we started talking about each of our worlds, and then realizing we could take these two unrelated worlds and put them together in an interesting way to, and sometimes it's good to have a little goal. So, put them together in an interesting way to tell the story of the end of magic. So, just to have just a little something to work on. Just a modest story overarching to tell. Yeah. And, we told that story. What was it? 5 years? 4 years?
I don't know.
I want to say 4 or 5 years.
With a happy anticlimactic ending, which really annoyed one person, which made it extra sweet.
Yes. Super anticlimactic ending.
Oh, yeah, you guys are all the bad guys. Have a nice day.
Badish. Yeah.
Sliding scale. It's a sliding scale.
Yeah. There were good reasons to end magic.
Yes, there were.
Compelling stuff.
Yes. That was an epic campaign. Campaigns, I guess. Let's see. Now, for each of you, for whatever you want to go, what do you consider your biggest achievement to date?
I'll go first. I think my biggest achievement, luckily, gets to correspond to why we're here talking about the Darkness Beneath Dalentown. But it also has to do with another venture, because my biggest achievement was being able to run two projects that were very dissimilar at the same time. Matt and I did the Darkness Beneath Dalentown in a fairly short time frame because there's this event called Original Edition Appreciation Day. And so there was the whole marketing thing that other people were doing around OD&D. So I was like, oh, this is the primary, let's hit this release date and we get that free marketing.
Rush to print.
Right, yeah, exactly. And I found out about it while Matt and I were talking about writing an adventure, maybe right before. And so I was like, oh my God, we got to do this right now and get this done. So, but at the same time I was working on, so that was Matt and I were the only two people involved. Right. Mm-hmm. So he came up with the story. I did all the art and layout. At the same time I'd been working on a project that was about 2 to 3 months long. It actually went a little bit longer. And it was about 6 people involved, and it was a project about hags, and it's available on DM's Guild. It's called The Hags Hexes. I just released it, and so it was like I said, 6 or 8 people all writing parts, basically turning hags into these low. So hags in D&D 5th edition are low challenge rating. They're level 2 to 5 or something like that. We wanted to make them the end campaign boss. And the way to do that is to look at fairy tales and look at what hags do. And it's they curse people for 100 years. They do things that take a huge amount of time, or you have to go on some epic quest to find a cure for, and you can't defeat them or get out of this bargain that you've made with them otherwise. And so being able to do those 2 projects at the same time was incredibly difficult, and keep my brain straight about what I was doing when. But to be able to do them and have them both come out successfully and be really cool releases, that's absolutely the biggest achievement I've had in role-playing games.
Awesome. Matthew.
Okay, so my biggest accomplishment. So many years ago, there was a nor'easter that whipped through this region, and we were out of power for, I'd say, a week and a half. And there were times that I was able to move through my room without stubbing my toe. That I think that showed me what I could do if I really put my mind to it. That, things that, knowing how disorganized things can be, this was a revelation that I can't even begin to describe. That, wow, I can do this. If I can move across a messy room without breaking my toe, I am destined for great things, my friend.
Especially if the power's out.
Yeah, the power's out. It was dark in there, and I was pretty cold at the time, so maybe my foot's a little numb. So that's
that's like a challenge 10 encounter right there.
It really is. It really is.
Terrain hazard.
I don't remember this time because I was on my honeymoon for the entire time that everybody was out of power.
Lucky.
Congratulations, jerk.
We sailed right through it as it hit New York.
But you didn't learn anything.
Yeah. You didn't have a life-changing epiphany.
Oh, I learned things.
Double congratulations.
I learned some things, let me tell you. So now, right along those lines, so when you did learn of it, what was the impact on the progress that you had as an author and a world builder?
You mean about my kidding answer about breaking my toe?
No. I want real follow up to that one.
Yeah, let's start there.
So okay, real accomplishment was probably winning a very small game design contest with a game called Force of Will. And it was a game design contest for Contessa, an online wonderful convention. And many years ago, they had a contest, make a role-playing game, and the one supply is a single 4-sided die. So I created a game for that called Force of Will. And before that, I had homebrewed systems, but nothing I had ever shared publicly. So to actually win a little contest and get that into a convention magazine was pretty huge. And while that wasn't really world building per se, it was more the mechanical side of things. I think it was a massive boost to confidence, which I needed to get into more writing and have faith that I can share this stuff and people may react well.
Yeah, along similar lines, I would have to say that working on 2 different releases helped me develop a voice and realize that different voices matter. So you can't always just develop one voice. Even Matt's talking about the mechanical side. It still has something to do with world building because we're talking about role playing games here, right? So when I was working on the Darkness Beneath Dalentown, it's an old school adventure. I talked about the design kind of by subtraction, leaving blanks and all this stuff. That's an OD&D thing to do. That's what old school fans are looking for. They are the world builders. Like they have to be probably a huge part of your audience, because those are the people who they'll look at the Greyhawk campaign setting that came out in, was it 1981 box set, and they'll be like, that's too much information. I want to build my own thing. I was cool when you gave me like 2 lines of text about the world, buried deep in the owl bear stat block, in the first monster manual. So like they want to do the world building on their own. So design by subtraction works for that. But then 5th edition is through online stuff like Critical Role, and many other shows about role-playing games are bringing in this new audience. They don't have the same inspirations, and they don't have the same interactions that the old school crowd does in terms of world building and fantasy necessarily. So they might be looking for more information. Like they want maybe more catalog stuff, or they're looking at like the wiki for Forgotten Realms, say, or Dragonlance, because they want to know that entire canon, and there's something about memorizing all that garbage, for lack of a better word. So my point being, for the Hags Hexes is a much more developed work. We're trying to fill in gaps. We're trying to fill all the holes and give you all these like widgets and mechanics and things to work with, and world building ideas, in terms of Hags, in terms of how they fit into fairy tales versus horror, and sometimes combining the motifs. So it's 2 very different worlds to live in and build with, if that makes sense.
Makes sense. What real world advice do you wish you had known sooner?
Matt, do you have one to start?
Yes. I sure do. I'm not buying myself time right here in talking about time. I think the nature of time itself is cyclical. No,
I'll throw you a bone. I'll answer that question, because I have 2 things that are related. So hopefully this doesn't cheat on the answer by giving you 2 things. But the real world advice that led me to write hex crawling for the DM's Guild, and then be able to get to this point where I'm publishing adventures on multiple sites and things like that, and work with other people, other authors, was these 2 sayings that are related. If you want to write, finish writing. You can sit there writing all day long and building a thing until you finish it. It's you're not really a writer in a way. You might be a builder, or you might be inspired, but you're not really a writer until you finish it. And the other thing was write for yourself. This idea of like, writing for an audience, as I mentioned, you're not going to make a living publishing Dungeons & Dragons adventures on a third-party site through this, you know what I mean? Like it's not really the way to go. You're there to release your stuff to the world, so you got to finish it. And if you're writing for yourself, other people will be inspired by that, and the people who want to look for that kind of story or that kind of world to build their own stories and adventures off of, they'll find that stuff. I hope that was enough time.
Matt?
Yes. I think the real world advice that was important to me was meet other game designers. In talking to people who are building games and building worlds, hearing them ask questions about your setting and looking for answers to questions about how they should handle things in their own settings is very inspiring. And speaking to what Tim said about voices, you get to work with somebody whose voice is outside of your head. You get to work with somebody who is going to think of something that you might not have necessarily jumped to on your own. And I think that in building a world or setting or even a game, having that perspective, having those unexpected questions is really important to developing how you can look at something and develop it further.
definitely.
Yeah. Well, the things I always found interesting were like people who fancy themselves like book authors, you know, and they're either trying to, or maybe they've written books, maybe they've published them, maybe they've not. Always go to this area where they're creating a circle of people to do self-critique and craft their arts. As game masters, you know, at least for me and in my experience, it only ever accidentally happened. You know, it's like there was never no active, you know, especially when you're starting off, no active searching out other people who do what you want to, who are doing what you're doing, and flesh it out to make it better. So I think that's really good advice, because, you know, I think, you know, maybe we need to do more of that, you know, just because it's one, it's fun, but two, it helps make you think a little bit more roundedly, I guess you would say. Or at least I am saying. I don't know what you would say, but I would say roundedly, even though adverbs everyone loves. Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. So,
if I may add to that for just a second, I couldn't possibly be a better example of exactly why you should do that, because I mentioned before when you said, you know, when did you first realize you were a world builder so late in life, for me was exactly that. I'd seen, I'd run through so many adventures that Matt had run us through, and then obviously the Vampire Chronicle that you put us through, and all these other stories. But there was no reflection on my own skills when I sat at the head of the table and was the DM. So I was just kind of like either trying to retell your stories because I was inspired by them, or I had already developed bad habits, like having the Mary Sue NPC that, you know, the players kind of just watch their story instead of having their own story and adventure. So yeah, having that ability to kind of step back and hear other people's view on the stories you're telling and the world you're building is absolutely critical. And I think that's one of the best things coming out of podcasts like this and the entire side of the current wave of D&D. So many people are coming from podcasts and YouTube videos and Twitch replays and stuff like that. And they're getting that advice earlier on, which is great. So I think that's a very good thing for future storytellers and world builders.
Now, just quickly, because this is a little bit different, we're talking about like the release of a game material instead of like just a normal book, which is typically what most people have talked about when they've come on the show before. Let's say someone wanted to try out your module. What's the name of that?
The Darkness Beneath Dalentown. Okay,
The Darkness Beneath Dalentown. Like, what would they need outside of the module to play it for someone starting off?
Great question. Honestly, Swords and Wizardry, the beauty of the retro clone movement, the old school Renaissance as they call it, is that the Wizards of the Coast released the SRD for the 3rd edition of the game. People basically backwards engineered it to restate the original edition of the game. So Swords and Wizardry, you can buy the book, the rule book for it, and it's a very small rule book. It's only like 100 and something pages, which sounds like a lot, but it's mostly just monsters and spells, whatever. But it's actually freely available online. So one of the primary reasons I wanted to start, I mentioned that we're going to have other versions of this game for other systems. The reason why I wanted to start with Swords and Wizardry wasn't just old school marketing, but the fact that you can freely get the system, and it's encouraged that you freely get the system, and that it's just out there. So you technically only need an internet connection to go find those rules. If you want to pick up the books for it, obviously that's great. There's really only the one. I mean, other people have released supplements and things for it, expanding it. But it's a very low buy-in, so it's very easy to get into that game.
So this really would be a great place for someone to start if they've never played around in role-playing before.
Absolutely. I mean, this adventure is for a little bit more mid-level characters, but that's not even really a barrier for...
Well, then they just die a lot. I have no trouble with
that. We know.
Why you're so afraid of killing player characters? I can't understand this.
The one thing all of us are familiar with playing with Jeff is be prepared to lose your character. Have a backup one rolled up already.
Or two.
I killed one of your characters several times, Michael. So,
but I helped you.
Yeah, it's true. But in my defense, though, in the earlier days, I was really used to playing with soldiers. So when you had easy encounters, my brain had to translate out of that to realize that what you were expecting to be an easy, like I said, if you call it an engagement and the players don't call it an engagement, it's probably going to be more difficult for them. For like a group of soldiers, would be very simple things to deal with.
And to be clear, when Jeff says group of soldiers, he's not talking about a group of characters that are soldiers. He's talking about a group of soldiers that are playing D&D as characters, and subsequently they play like a unit. They understand combat. They understand tactics. So when they come across a physical opposition, they immediately all go into soldier mode. But when you have a group of individual people who have never been in the military and all have their own opinion as to how combat should go, it doesn't always go as smooth.
Yes, most definitely.
I learned early on, and this might be good advice to anyone gaming with someone who has a superior skill. After my first character or two, I realized I wanted to create a character with a military background. So I created a character with military background and tactics, and leaned heavily on this phrase. My character knows more about tactics than the player does. So based on my successful role, what should I know here? So that saved my ass countless times.
Okay.
What I hate is when it's in reverse and we'll get into a situation and I'm just like, I know way more about this than my character does, but I have to play dumb because he did not pay the character points to be that smart.
Oh yeah, I did take naive. Who knew that would?
Sure, I'll buy the bridge. Only 12 gold? All right. Here's your deed.
Well, here comes the king. I'm going to ask for a toll as he crosses my new bridge. All right, so now we're getting up to the Gaul Around. And just in case you guys didn't read through the interview flow, which as my friends, I would hope you didn't. The Gaul Around is where you come up with a quick one-line answer. And I really designed this to frustrate novel authors. You guys will probably be much better at this than them. Okay. So, first question. What held you back from sharing your world or worlds, Tim?
Wanting to write for an audience. I didn't realize I could just write it for myself and make what I thought was cool.
Matthew.
Low self-esteem.
Okay. Question
Number two. Favorite type of fantasy world? Alien, Earth-like, or Earth-based? Matthew.
Earth-based.
Tim?
Earth-based, but way more fantasy.
What is your favorite time period for a fantasy setting? Tim.
Post-apocalypse.
Matthew.
Iron Age.
Excellent.
Yeah, Jeff likes that one. What is the most important habit or skill in creating a world?
Only one.
Tim?
Not making it too alien.
Matt?
Make sure you have a unique viewpoint in there.
That's a good one. Jeff?
Oh, I'm sorry. My turn? Okay, let's see. What tools or tool could you not work without? Tim?
Maps, because I need visualization.
Matthew?
A crowbar. I'll explain later.
What is the one resource you would offer to a world builder starting down your path? Aside to Jack Daniels.
Who goes first?
Oh, Matt.
I would say forums.
Oh, good call. Tim?
That's a good one. I would go with Pinterest boards, again with the visuals.
Pretty pictures.
Jeff?
Okay.
7.
If you ended up in a world you created, Tim, what would be the first thing that you do?
Absolutely, hands down, I would go do a beer and wine tasting, because I feel like if you find you're in a world where people like IPAs, it sucks.
Okay. Matthew.
Hire a bodyguard because I know some of the monsters I create. Holy crap.
Matthew's my monster guy. All right. I actually want to thank you guys a lot. This is the first time we've done an interview. I hope as you guys come out with new stuff, you let us know, and we'll try and set something up for more interviews. It'll be structured differently if we do them again, because it's kind of silly to ask the same questions twice. But for the people who are out there in the Webernets, as it is copyrighted by Michael, so you have to pay him a dime if you say it.
And since you're on this show, you have to say it.
1,000 times.
Smart. Times.
What are some
the Webernets?
What are some ways people can get a hold of you in the Webernets? People contact you.
Twitter at ProudGamer, Google Plus at Matthew Bannock, the Book of Face at Matthew Bannock, and of course, we mentioned it briefly, but Descriptors has a page, and keep an eye out for Descriptors Definitive Edition.
Ooh,
excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm currently at neuronphaser.com. It's not easy to say, so I might just switch that over to timbannock.com in the near future.
Yeah,
there'll be a redirect on it. I'm pretty much at Tim Bannock on all social media, so you can find me on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook as well.
And in such places?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, what everyone needs to do as soon as you stop listening to this is go to the show notes, go to the link, The Darkness Beneath Dalentown. Go click through there, buy it twice, give one to a friend. Okay, so that is the conclusion of the interview with Tim and Matthew Bannock. I want to thank you all so much. Remember to go check them out on social media. There's a copy of that on the show notes for this episode or episode 233. And remember to go to garduel.com/darkness to pick up a copy of The Darkness Beneath Dalentown with all of the oozes plus much, much more. Thank you so much for listening to the World Builders Anvil.
We would love it if you would share the World Builders Anvil with 2 of your friends.
And so would they.
If they are unfamiliar with podcasts, then you get to introduce them to the wonderful world of podcasting.
Take them to Stitcher or iTunes, or best of all, just send them to our website, www.garduel.com.
That's GARDUL.com.
Now strike while the mithril's hot.